Violet lived with her grandmother. The girl was orphaned at 9 years old, and after her parents died, her grandmother took over the upbringing of her granddaughter. The woman took her education seriously. She helped her with her studies, taught her decency, compassion, kindness, and justice. The woman worked all her life as a nurse in a hospital, and Violet often ran to the hospital after school and tried to do something to help. The girl nursed the patients, cheered them up, entertained them with stories, and soon all the patients and even the staff became very fond of Violet. The girl felt in hospital as at home, and most doctors and nurses said that Violet could become a good doctor and therefore advised her to study more chemistry and biology and after school to enter medical school. So Violet did. She had no problem with admission and studying in medical school because she studied very well. But during studying in the 4th year, her grandmother got very sick and Violet had to take a part-time job as a nurse in a hospital department that she loved since childhood. In the morning, she attended classes. In the afternoon, she took care of her grandmother. And in the evening, she was on duty in the hospital. One day, during one of these shifts, a young man was brought to the hospital with a serious head injury, and he was unconscious. Violet felt very sorry for such a young man. She often sat by his bed in her spare minutes during her shift, and on the 3rd day the guy came to his senses. He asked Violet where he was and what had happened to him. The girl told him that he had been found with a head injury and was now in the hospital. The young man could not remember anything, not even where he lived or who his parents were, and could only give his name, Sean. The girl calmed him down and saying that this happens with concussion and that his memory would come back with time, and so began their friendship, a nurse and a patient. Sean gradually began to feel better, but his memory didn't return to him. Violet tried to help him. She talked to him, called dates, addresses, names, but nothing helped. The doctor advised to wait. Maybe over time, some event, smell, or word would bring back the young man's memory. A month later, Sean was physically well, and it was time for him to be discharged. Violet was worried about the young man because he never remembered anything, and he had nowhere to go. The doctor was going to transfer him to a rehabilitation facility for such patients, but Violet decided to shelter him at her home. After work, she went straight home to talk to her grandmother. "Grandma, do you remember I told you about my patient who had no memory? Well, Sean will be discharged from the hospital tomorrow, and he has nowhere to go. I don't want him to end up in a center for the mentally ill. Can he stay with us for a while?" Grandma stroked her granddaughter's hair and replied, "Of course, honey. I taught you compassion myself, so let him stay with us. I've heard so much about him from you, so I'll finally get to know him." At first, Sean was embarrassed to hear the girl's offer, but Violet was persistent. "Come on. Don't think your living with us are burdensome for us. Our grandmother is sick. She can't get out of bed, and I'm either at school or work. That's where your help comes in handy. And a man in a house with 2 women will find something useful to do, won't he?" Eventually, Sean agreed and moved in. The grandmother liked him because he was caring, sociable, and modest. He did all of the housework, took care of the grandmother, bought groceries. It was hard for the girl to watch Sean unsuccessfully try to remember something, and she reassured him, saying that everything would come to its place by itself when the memory gets the necessary sign. One weekend, Violet and Sean decided to go shopping together to a large shopping mall. When Violet told Sean the name of the mall, it sounded familiar, but Sean could not yet remember what it was. The young people walked for a long time through the stores of the 2-story shopping center, and suddenly someone grabbed Sean by the sleeve and called him son. An elderly, gray-haired man with a pale face stared at Sean without looking away. At that moment, Sean felt unwell, and he lost consciousness. When Violet brought him to his senses, Sean looked at the gray-haired man and called him his father. The elderly man was crying. He could not believe his eyes. Many months ago, he had buried his son, identifying him by his jacket, since it was impossible to identify the body. Sean explained that he had lost his memory, but now he remembered everything and able to tell them both what had happened to him. Sean was from a wealthy family, and the mall belonged to their family company. On the day of the disaster, he went to a cafe to drink coffee and write some important letters. When he came out, he noticed a beggar in dirty and tattered clothes who looked like he had a bad cold. Sean felt sorry for him and decided to give him his jacket and some cash. Most likely, a terrible thing happened to him later, because it was from the jacket that Sean's father identified his son's body. The evening was nice and sunny, and Sean decided to walk, and he didn't notice how he had walked into an unknown part of the city where he ran into some criminals. They surrounded him, and the last thing he remembered was a bandit stepping towards him with a crowbar in his hand. He woke up in the hospital, where he met his guardian angel, Violet. The father, listening to his son, didn't know how to thank the young woman, because she returned his son to him. But the girl just answered that it was her mission to help people. She thought to herself that now she definitely lost her friend. So she said goodbye and went to the exit of the shopping center. Sean called out to her, but then his colleagues ran up to him, and the tumultuous emotions of his return to this world engulfed him. Violet got into a cab and cried, and she entered her house. She sank to the floor without strength. On inquiries from her concerned grandmother, the girl, sobbing, told her that she had fallen in love with Sean, but that his memory had come back today. She was very happy for him, but he turned out to be the son of rich parents, and now he would hardly communicate with a simple nurse. The elderly woman had long understood that there were feelings between the young people that they were afraid to admit to each other. She hugged her granddaughter and advised her to wait, saying that Sean was a kind and decent man, and she was sure that everything would be all right. A month passed, but Sean never showed up or even called. The girl was very upset about her first big disappointment in her life, because it turns out she fell in love with a man she didn't know at all. He may not have loved her, but he could at least visit her grandmother, who had always treated him so warmly. She and her grandmother tried not to talk about him, but constantly some little thing reminded them of the man who had once lived with them. But one day, returning from work, the girl found a guest at home. Sean and his grandmother were having a lively conversation and drinking tea. When Sean saw Violet, he got up and walked over to her. He apologized for keeping silent for such a long time, but he had to get used to his past life. But all this time, he didn't forget about Violet and his feelings for her. The man confessed his love for her, and then took out a box with a ring and proposed. He looked questioningly at Violet, who could not believe her happiness. She joyfully threw herself into Sean's arms and told him that she had missed him very much and that she couldn't live without him. 3 years passed. Young people got married, and they had a son. Violet finished her studies, took an internship, and was few steps away from becoming a real doctor as she had dreamed. And the grandmother lived with him in a big house and was surrounded by care and attention until the end of her days.